Hi everybody, welcome back to the headquarters of the CC and JT Amateur Hour, a podcast that's designed to help writers write. This is the next video in the ongoing series of videos where I am reading my first book, Duties Faithfully Executed. I had a brain fart there, I almost forgot the name of the book. There it is. Oops, there it is. Woohoo, pretty book. It's out there on Kindle. It's been out there on Kindle since 2023. And what I'm doing here is I'm going through the book slowly, methodically, so y'all have a chance to hear my thoughts as it's created. It's an okay book. I'm having fun rediscovering it. I haven't read it for many years. So as I'm reading it with you now, I'm also reading it at the same time for myself, reminding myself, wow, that was a long time ago, almost 10 years. It took, this is about the 10th anniversary of the creation of the book. But it's like I've grown and I've learned things. And so after I'm done reading this portion of it, I'm going to go back and I'm going to say what I could have done better and what I did right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to dive into the next part of Duties Faithfully Executed. As always, if you want to give feedback or if you want to push back or anything like that, everything's down there, in the usual places, and you can reach me through Twitter and things like that. So, feel free. Through the website, of course, at www.carsonhume.com. By the way, editor's note, if you hear any weird noises or loud noises or banging or smashing or anything like that, it's one of two things. One thing is it could be a ghost. This is an old house, and so boom, boom, boom. We've got 3 levels here, so, it could be the house ghost saying, hey, chill. Or it could be CC down in the basement rearranging things as she does. So if you do hear loud noises, just grin and bear it, and let's move on, okay? So anyway, I'm going to dive into this with the next interlude, and this interlude is titled Campaign Manager. Gentle reminder that this is a book about a politician, and he is writing his autobiography, and he's going over various roles in the campaign. So, Campaign Manager, let us dive in. The injustice of a memoir like this is that so many important people are treated superficially or simply passed over. That isn't fair to any of them, especially the hundreds of dedicated campaign workers who gave time and energy not just the trail, but to all the office workers. There's so much work is done out there by the state and local staffers, the information technology gurus, and the volunteers. I can't praise the volunteers enough. Lord, what a blessing. These folks took precious and irreplaceable time from their lives, workplaces, and families to get the message out to the masses. Every mile I walked, they walked 50. And every hand I shook, they rang 100 doorbells. These were the essential Americans who loved and believed in their candidate, and through me, loved and believed in their country. When the darkness threatened to engulf me, I let myself get dragged into a conversation with an older woman about her grandson serving overseas. Or a mother would hand me, a total stranger, a picture of her baby boy. Or an elderly Vietnam War veteran who would sit me down and we'd compare our Purple Hearts. The examples are endless, and I was humbled by each and every one of them. At the end of the day, I swore I'd take their stories to Washington and fight for them when others had given up. From time to time, I believed in myself, if only for a moment. It takes a maniac to herd all of the energy into a singular direction. My maniac was Doug Peters. Doug was a legacy campaign manager in that he descended from generations of men and women used to holding power from behind the throne. Doug's family had a representative in nearly every important English-speaking political campaign since Cromwell evicted the English Rump Parliament in 1653. At your dinner table, you might have discussed school or sports with your kids. Doug grew up listening to his ancestors, parents, grandparents, aunts, uncles, and so on, talk about the strength of the Electoral College or the placement of lecterns during debates. If you counted its chromosomes, I'm certain you'd find a political gene somewhere in the string. The stereotype of the campaign manager probably tends towards an angry and impatient executive who mainlines antacids and has little time for staff shenanigans or screw-up. And that image certainly fit his father and his grandfather. Doug was a rebel in that he led the campaign with patience, hope, and a gentle hand inside a velvet glove. I'm one of the few people who thought his style equally effective with those of his antecedents in that you didn't want to disappoint him. When I messed up like I did with Yucca Mountain, I inwardly cringed at the thought of discussing it with Doug. He did what he usually did. He put his arm around my shoulders and quietly explained where I could make things better. Here I was, a chief executive of a state with hundreds of executive branch employees and a National Guard at my beck and call, promising him to straighten up and fly right, his favorite admission. Aside from the barbecue chicken, his main weakness was one of character. He was passionately loyal to those who fought in the trenches with him. He refused to pay hatchet men. Natalie, Don, and Marnie were the same way, and that's the reason they were on board. Our big thing was to avoid politics as usual and show our opponents how to be successful with the electorate without compromising the important principles of loyalty, teamwork, accessibility, and outreach. We weren't going to use the same script that alienated the electorate and drove them to vote for the other guy. We were going to set a new standard where traveling the high road and speaking well of each other's was acceptable. What we fail to realize is politicians play those games because they work, and they work well. Voters want the candidates to viciously attack each other's jugular and rip open the enemy's guts for all to see. We expect the political gladiator to be destroyed in the campaign's arena so we can speak of his or her pain by the water cooler the next day. Politics is more than a sport. It's a national obsession. The longer we refused to play this game, the less we were respected, and the less we were taken seriously. This was embarrassing clear to us in the first primary debate in Manchester. 8 of us lined up on the stage with the moderator who was supposed to take turns answering questions on a metaphorical wheel. The opponent to our right was either to support our position and counter with one of their own. From the luck of the draw, I got Senator Pete Bowie on my right. You know him better as the eventual winner of that year's campaign, President Peter J. Bowie. My relationship with Pete was complicated. Don't get me great. He was a great American, and I valued his razor-sharp mind and his ability to draw naysayers into his camp. He could fill any size room with his personality, and both that he and Lyndon Baines Johnson were raised in the same part of the country did not surprise me one bit. And his memory. You might think the man a database had a personal database, a database of personal facts regarding every person you met. If you were important to him, his wife got a card on her birthday. If he needed your vote in Congress, she got flowers every year without fail. The guy was a consummate politician, I thought at the time. What I learned later was he carried a pocket tape recorder with him everywhere, and a trusted staff member listened to it, updated the appropriate databases and calendars, and destroyed the tape immediately. Pete served in his first term in political office during the end of the Nixon debacle and wasn't about to let any recordings follow him around. My point is, he could blot out everyone in the room with a handshake and a smile, even during a national debate with 8 players. We were up there on the stage being broadcast live on C-SPAN and National Public Radio, so maybe 17 actual voters were dialed in if we were lucky. There were probably thousands of media members and political consultants on the line. It's these kinds of events early in the campaign that help the consultants, newspaper editors, and television news chiefs decide where to dedicate their precious human resources. Pete Bowie was going to get the A team because of his favored status in the campaign, and he was charismatic as hell. The reporters assigned to the rest of us would either get the up-and-comers or the roadies. That's an acronym from the Air Force, roadie, retired on active duty. I was in the middle of the pack on stage and got a hanging softball from the moderator about the rising costs of veterans' benefits, noticeably health care for wounded warriors like myself. I started my rehearsed spiel about how we should honor our finest and youngest warriors when I was interrupted by a hard slap on the back. "Listen to the man, folks," Pete said in his not-so-humble Texas way. "Governor Carson here is one of the finest representatives of our newest, greatest generation." And he hit the ground at full speed like a steroid-injected greyhound chasing a rabbit. In the next 10 minutes, he managed to touch on everything from national debt to the deplorable conditions of the VA hospitals around the country, but not in Texas. The moderator did his best to cut him off, but he was not about to stand in front of this high-speed express train. I admit I was taken in and kind of in a daze when Pete handed the spotlight back to me, but I wasn't ready. My slack-jawed grin was the trending picture on Twitter for the next 6 hours. What didn't hit the social networks was the wrap-up, and we went in reverse order in our closing statements. When his turn came up, Pete praised the moderator, his colleagues on the stage, and the First Amendment for making the night possible. He promised the sky, the moon, the chicken in every pot to his current and future supporters, though not in those exact words. He sounded simultaneously gracious and humble as only Pete Bowie can. When it was my turn, I had to get something off my chest. Quote, "Ladies and gentlemen, I also thank you for this opportunity to share the stage with the biggest and most inspirational members of the Democratic Party. Some here I've met tonight, and others, like Senator Bowie, I feel I've known my entire life. No matter how this campaign ends, I'll remember and cherish these moments. Earlier, I was asked about our veterans and the rising costs of their medical care, and that's a safe question with me. I've been the beneficiary of the world's greatest medical facilities, but I've also been troubled by our country's most burdensome bureaucracies. I'm not the only one, by far. Men and women seeking essential care that we as a nation promised them must jump through hoops, fill out forms, and wait for someone 1,000 miles away to make a decision. Why does this happen? Well, it's because we made a set of equally important promises to provide our quality care to our veterans at a reasonable price. Keep costs down was the mantra of the proponents of small government. It's not easy to do, especially with the limited number of doctors and specialists, and when there are other fiscal priorities for our great nation. We have a lot of checks to write, and our country's bank account is running on empty. So what do? We play a shell game and move the money around, and when the events and decisions finally line up correctly, this soldier gets his physical therapy, this sailor gets his overdue biopsy, this Marine is allowed to fill a prescription. I paused I paused for a moment, then melodramatically stomped my right foot twice. And this airman can get the fake leg to replace the one he lost in battle. Ladies and gentlemen, we're making a lot of promises not only to our new greatest generation, as Senator Bowie put it, but to our country as a whole. One of those promises, like I said, is to keep costs down. That's difficult to do when we're fighting wars that cost $300 million a day, as did Afghanistan and Iraq did when I served. Even today, we're spread out all over the globe, putting our young people in harm's way. They get hurt, sometimes badly. So the cycle of providing medical care starts all over again. You want to know what I think is the best way to keep down veterans' medical costs? Let's start by not hurting them in the first place. When I am president, I will do everything I can do to solve international conflicts by invoking 3 things before I commit troops: diplomacy, diplomacy, and more diplomacy. But let's be realistic. Every president eventually has to send young people where bullets fly. When that happens, they will come home to a medical and support system that addresses the needs of them and their families quickly, efficiently, and with dispatch. No man or woman will ever wonder when or where the care is. They know it will be there because I promise it here and now. It's no secret I have a Purple Heart or two. When a bunch of us get together, we laugh and point at each other. That's not a sign of disrespect, but our way of saying we were too dumb to duck. I'm not ducking on this. I am keeping this issue alive. I ask that you join me in honor our wounded veterans with a fulfilled promise. Dropping my eyes to my notes, I started to mentally kick myself on the spot. I didn't hear the remaining closing remarks of the moderator and the night festivities. After shaking everyone's hand, I left the stage for our bus parked in the back, not even pausing to take questions from reporters afterwards. I'd felt I'd embarrassed myself and my campaign again by speaking from the gut and straying off the scripted remarks, and I wanted nothing more to open up one of the beers in the fridge. Doug intercepted me at the door and wrapped me up in a bear hug. "What the hell?" I pushed him away. You did great. He beamed at me with like a proud father. What are you talking about? With that fancy little stomp and speech of yours, you earned us thousands of free airplay that we couldn't even begin to buy. You'll be the topic of the week. You're drunk, Doug. Doug tilted his head back and gave one of his full belly laughs, the infectious kind that drew everyone's attention. People around us began smiling even though they didn't know why. You've got great instincts. They're all going to talk about you, Governor. Just do me a favor. What? Don't listen to them. Doug turned out to be absolutely right. My performance at the debate didn't play well on the social networks, but it did grab the pundits' attention and became the topic of the week and beyond. He was also correct in saying I shouldn't listen because they were unanimous in my passion, their admiration for my passion, and their disdain for the mechanics of our campaign. Naive was the gentlest assessment, and freaking ignorant of the current political reality was about in the middle. You can pretty much guess what the bloodsuckers said on the extreme right-wing channel. It's safe to say they were not pleased with the theatrics of the stomp. Years later, political cartoonists still have a field day whenever I reemerge in the public arena. The first thing they always sketch is me stomping my foot. Despite my performance and personal expectations, we got serious reporters assigned to our campaign, including Jack Hoskins from the Post and two sharp ones who had been formerly embedded with our troops in Afghanistan. Looking back, I have to say they treated me as fairly as possible considering the circumstances. Not every presidential candidate can say that. This escapade reminded me that Doug's best gift was prediction. He always knew when and where the next controversy would explode, and he'd have Don and Natalie prepare my responses ahead of time. Dozens of cousins stationed around the world, neck deep in their own campaign, aided him. But even then, Doug could guess which ways the wind would blow, and he was always right. He was a quality person, my brother from another mother, and was so far in over his head on my campaign, he couldn't see the depth of the water from where he sank. To compete on a national stage, we needed him to be a pit bull. But we got a teddy bear. People took outrageous advantage of his goodwill, with me being the worst offender. Maybe I would have been president that November if he'd been a wartime consigliere, but he wasn't and would never be one. My treatment of Doug is what happened in Iowa, and he's the reason why many of my old friends keep me at arm's length even now. Who could blame them? They could be next. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and stop there because that was a pretty deep chapter with a whole lot of moving parts. And the campaign manager being a very key, if not the key, figure in any kind of national or statewide campaign. It's a very high, not to mention the candidate, of course, but a campaign manager is a really, really, really key figure in any campaign. I was a campaign manager for a very tiny statewide political drive once, and and I immersed myself in it, and I used that time as material for this, but it wasn't nearly on the same scale, but it gave me an internal view as to the mechanisms as to what it takes to elect somebody, a kindergarten view, whereas somebody who manages a national or a real statewide campaign, is at the college level, at the graduate degree, whereas I was a kindergarten first grader. But still, to see that kind of view from the inside, the making of the sausage, so to speak, is what gave me the material for this particular chapter. Now, I'd like to talk about what I would do different, and probably one thing I would do different is I would pick names different, because I realize as I'm reading this, I've got two main characters that have close names beginning with a capital D, so it's easy to get them mixed up. So what I would probably do is, if I were to rewrite this book or write this book today, I would give one of the characters a different name, so it was clear, Doug and Dave, is problematic. So, the idea is to help the reader read and continue to suspend that disbelief. Otherwise, there were some typos in there, so you probably heard me, stumble over them. The typos are always going to happen in a book. That's fine. These things happen. So you just have to be patient with me, and sort of like I said, you sort of have to grin and bear it as I work my way through that. Outside of that, that's a fairly strong chapter where I set up, gave what I felt was a really decent view of the inside of the campaign. I also did some really interesting foreshadowing there, whereas Bruce is a campaign for president, but I make it very clear that he's going to lose this campaign by naming the actual winner of that campaign, so that there's some foreshadowing going on there. I also foreshadowed what's going to be happening in the next chapter. The very next chapter was going to be happening to Bruce in the terms of a flashback. Now, these flashbacks are going to end here pretty soon, and I have been told that flashbacks like these interludes are weak when it comes to writing, because readers don't really like flashbacks, and I'm coming around to that, because stories should be told moving forward. So flashbacks, good, bad, I guess that really depends on your writing style. Would I use them now? I would, to a lesser degree, but to a very small degree. But this book is mostly flashbacks, interceding with current events, way too much in the first half. So I'd probably rewrite that. Okay, I blathered on long enough. The next chapter is going to be really kind of interesting. It picks up a little bit more. That's the nice thing, is this book is going to pick up a little bit more as I write going forward instead of looking back. Okay? Thank you for following along. Again, if you want to have any feedback, everything's down there, as are the links to the other videos. Read along if you want. The book is out on Kindle. I provide the link to that book down there. Thank you, take care, and goodbye from the worldwide headquarters of the CC and JT Amateur Hour, the podcast that helps writers write.